Let's get a little more on this and speak to Monzer Akbik. He's a former member of the Syrian National Coalition and the current spokesman of the Tomorrow movement, which is part of the Syrian opposition bloc. Monzer, many thanks for joining us. Now, I don't know if you heard that Syrian activists there saying that the collapse of these talks is not going to make any difference on the ground. I mean, what is your take on this? What impact is it going to have on the Syrian opposition and what they are doing on the ground?
Yeah, well, the failure of the cessation of hostilities agreement between the Russians and Americans, of course, the result of that, as we see, is devastating result on the ground. We are witnessing about 250,000 civilians in the eastern part of Aleppo. They don't have food, they don't have medicine, they don't have water, and they are under a constant and continuous campaign of bombing from the skies, indiscriminate bombing, and we are seeing that the civilian casualties toll is very high in the past couple of weeks, including many women and children. At the same time, diplomatically, we are also witnessing a tension between Russia and America that we haven't seen since the Cold War. Now, the question is, now, of course, for us, for the Syrian opposition and for the Syrian people, we don't see now that any diplomacy could save us on the ground. It looks like that everybody is run out of ideas. We talked with the Americans, we've talked with the Russians, we've talked with the Europeans, we have talked with the regional countries. Nobody really has an idea that could be implemented right now to save the people. So I would be surprised to see, for example, with this old tension between the Americans and the Russians, that America at the last 2 months of the administration, that will go to war, for example. So what is the hope? The only hope in the time being is that the Syrian rebels should be provided with more support and more modern weaponry so they can just defend themselves. This is the only hope that we can talk about for the time being.
Well, how do the rebels, the Syrian rebels that is, feel about the US? Do they feel that the US is supporting them enough, or do they feel abandoned?
You know, the United States supported the Syrian revolution both politically and in a humanitarian way, also on some hardware or some support. But it is, what I can say about this policy, it is a half-hearted policy, that every time they come late and every time they come short. So the support was not enough at the time where the Russians and the Iranians, the regime allies, they are always doubling down. They are always 1 or 2 steps ahead of the Americans. So that's why the problem is that this kind of half-hearted policy has unfortunately failed. And we are seeing what we are seeing now, that the Russians has the leverage on the ground. They have their army there, they have their warplanes there, and they are now making their option or what they want, that they wanted some kind of military victory. They want some kind of, they don't want now a political solution. They think that they can win this in a military way.
Monzer, let me interrupt you there. Isn't part of the problem also the US and others not knowing who to support, because the opposition is so fragmented? Why, after all this time, isn't there a much more cohesive unit fighting against the Syrian regime?
Yeah, this is also a problem. We have to admit the responsibility of the Syrian opposition, whether it is a political opposition or the military opposition, that they are, yes, very fragmented, and there is infighting in between them. There is responsibility on us, Syrians, to have done those mistakes. And also, at the same time, don't forget that the Syrian opposition, political and military, was supported by regional powers. And the regional powers, they were competing with them between each others. And they have some also differences between them, and each side and each axis, they supported certain factions, and this has caused also more fragmentation of the Syrian opposition. So I would say that everybody shares the responsibility. The Syrians, the regional powers and also the Americans for what we are seeing today of a complete failure of diplomacy and a complete also failure of this revolution reaching to its goals for democratic transition in Syria.
It's difficult to see a way out. Okay, many thanks for your time. Monzer Akbik, a former member of the Syrian National Coalition, spokesman for the Tomorrow movement, which is part of the opposition bloc.